The Panos Skordi encounter.
Welcome to part two on tackling challenges surrounding the IFM exam. Hi, Michael.
Hello.
So let's look at how to prepare for the IFM exam. Does this exam involve a lot of calculus?
I would say it does not involve a lot of calculus. Now, students will need to know how to do basic derivatives that'll be necessary for maximizing or minimizing a particular function. And they also might be responsible for taking sort of elementary integrals. That would be integrals of polynomials or exponentials. But beyond that, there's not much calculus on this exam, certainly less than exam P. So if students have taken exam P before IFM, which they will have, then I think just retaining the basics of calculus from that exam should be sufficient.
In your opinion, what skills does a student need to pass the IFM exam?
I think students need to be good problem solvers. There are all kinds of multiple choice and testing strategies that students need to have so that they can take complicated material and know how to approach a multi-step question in the most efficient way possible. Because it's not just about getting the question right, it's about getting the question right in an efficient, timely manner so that they don't run out of time on the exam, which is one of the biggest challenges. They also, I think, need to have a good memory because there are a lot of formulas on this exam for better or worse. Um, and I think they also need to have good calculator skills so that, again, they can be efficient in answering questions.
So is it best to have, again, in your opinion, is it best to have a regular routine in terms of study times during the week?
I think the answer to that question for a majority of students is yes. And the reason I'm hedging here is, as we know, all students have different learning styles. So I'm going to try to speak to the typical student. But I think having that regular routine will keep them from procrastinating too much. And it'll also allow them to identify the times that they are available consistently and perhaps when they work most efficiently. All of our brains work better at different times of the day. And so by having a regular routine, they can make sure that they're making the most of their study time by picking those times when there are the fewest distractions and when their brains perhaps work most efficiently.
And not looking just at the week, would you say it's a good idea to map out from day one of studying all the way through to the exam a timetable as what you're going to do and when you're going to do it?
Yes, I think that's crucial. Now, you're an academic, as am I, and so you may know that people in our field often crave not having such a set timetable and being on their own. But the danger of not having a schedule is that it's very easy to run out of time on this exam. And I think in mapping out your study time, you really want to think about it as having two target dates, not just one. And the reason I say that is that if you just have the testing date in mind, you might procrastinate or put off or study too slowly and then not have enough time at the end for working problems, for taking sample exams, for practicing your test strategy. And those things are equally as important as reading the textbooks or watching the videos or reading your manual to actually learn the material.
So how much time would you say a typical student needs in preparing for the exam?
Again, there's going to be a big range on this, but I would think somewhere from 150 for those students who learn 150 hours for those students who learn quite quickly or may have exam FM very fresh on their mind. Anywhere to about 300 hours for students is a typical range. And one thing, if you'll allow me to plug my seminar for a moment through the Infinite Actuary, as it relates to staying on a schedule, picking a number of hours, we actually have a tool called TIA Study that will do all of this for you. So you let it know which days, which times you'd like to study, when your test date is, and how much time you'd like to devote to working problems. And it'll map out the exact calendar for you and give you recommended time, track your progress, make sure you're staying on your schedule, and even automatically recalculate your schedule if for some reason you miss some of your designated study time. And I think that can be an invaluable resource for students who are trying to not only digest all of this material, but allocate their time properly.
So having said that, there's a tool that actually figures a lot of this stuff out for you. Generally, how much time would you say a student will spend on studying the material as opposed to practicing past questions?
That's a difficult question for me to answer because I find it very difficult to divorce studying the material from working problems. And what I mean by that is, again, if you don't mind me referencing my seminar, as I'm teaching the material, I'll have practice problems in there and I'll encourage students to pause the video and work on those problems so that then when we go through the solution, it will be more meaningful. And so I do think students should be working problems as they're learning the material, even for the first time. However, if we wanted to sort of draw a hard line between digesting the material and then simply practicing problems and taking sample exams, I think somewhere around a 50-50 split is probably appropriate. So if I was going to study for 3 months, I might want a month and a half for studying and learning the material for the first time, and then a month and a half for working problems and strictly practicing and getting more efficient. And of course, that would change for new students versus students who are retaking the exam. If you're retaking the exam, you can probably spend less time looking back over the material and more time working problems.
Right. That sounds like sound advice. Do you have any other tips on successfully navigating exam IFM?
Sure. I think one of the number one things I try to stress to my actuarial students and also to students at the collegiate level is that you can't memorize every possible solution. You have to learn the material. And I think one of the biggest traps we see students fall into is they try to work thousands and thousands of problems and they're not really learning the material. What they're doing is memorizing a solution to that material. And an analogy would be if I want to be a musician, there are two approaches I can take. I could learn how to read music, or I could try to memorize every composition that's ever been made. But even if I do have the memory to memorize every song that's ever been written, if I go in for an audition, there's no reason to say I might not see a novel piece of music because there are infinitely many ways we can arrange pieces of information or create fictitious derivatives to ask students to solve for a price. And so you can never memorize every possible way a question could be asked. So it's very important to learn to read the music of IFM as opposed to just trying to memorize all the songs. Another tip I would give is to try to practice under exam conditions to the maximum extent possible as early as possible. And what I mean by that is have in mind all the formulas you plan to memorize for the exam. I would recommend keeping a running sheet. This is a formula that I will know, I will have committed to memory by the time I get to the exam. And then as you're working practice problems, have that sheet with you, knowing that those are the formulas that will be locked in your brain on exam day, and don't have anything else so that you're learning to rely on just the things you'll have on exam day as you work these problems. Also, keep an eye on your watch as you're working these problems because I think a lot of students will work a problem and they think it's sufficient to ask the question, did I get it right or didn't I? But oftentimes you could get a problem right by chance, or even if you got it correct, it's likely that you didn't work it the most efficient way possible. One other thing I would say to keep in mind multiple choice exam strategy. So a pitfall that students can fall into is trying to get every single question on the exam right. And that can be one of the worst things you can do. If your goal is to get 30 out of 30 questions correct, and you find yourself spending 20 minutes on question 5, you may have just ruined your chance to get to questions 26 through 30, which may actually be a lot easier. So since every problem on this exam is worth the same amount, it's very important that you keep moving and you make sure that you can work all the problems that you can definitely work and work in a short amount of time. And you can always come back to those more difficult or those longer questions, time permitting, at the end of the exam. And then I guess one other tip I'll give, and you can stop me if I'm rambling here, would be to just keep in mind the strategies related to multiple choice questions. So if you have a long algebraic problem to solve, and that might take you 10 minutes, it's probably a lot more efficient to backplug answers from the 5 given answer choices. And that's obviously something that's always available on a multiple choice exam. And you should also learn to use your calculator as efficiently as possible. All of these calculators will store variables for you. And so on our exam, on IFM, for example, if you're working a Black-Scholes problem, which you will, um, there are ways that you can learn to work to punch those numbers into your calculator in the most efficient way by finding things like the prepaid forward price of the stock, which you're going to use multiple times in your calculation. Calculate it once, store it in your calculator, and now when it's time to that you need that number again, you can be much quicker at solving the problem.
You know, that's great. That's such great advice. Some of those things that you just mentioned there, uh, I had to learn the hard way, like not passing exams, having to retake them, not knowing why, saying that I've done a lot of work for this, I don't understand, and I spent so many hours. But you have to really engage with the work, not just go through questions and kind of memorize those questions. You have to know why that was the answer. So it's fantastic advice for students going forwards. Hopefully it saved them a lot of time, this advice you've given them. Thank you for that, Michael. Michael's contact details will be included in the description. This is your host, Panos Skordi, on the Panos Skordi Encounter. Take care wherever you are.